I got a comment on my last video about ring modulation from David Ryle, and he was curious how I would use DC instead of AC when I'm using ring modulators. And normally, if I'm using DC, it's with my ARP 2600, and it's mostly to get rhythmic effects. When a sound goes through an AC circuit, it lets all the sound through. When it goes through a DC circuit, it is primarily there to let the low frequencies through. What happens when you're using a pulse wave is as the sound goes through zero, you get a ticking sound or a popping sound. And I tend to use those ticking sounds or popping sounds for rhythmic effects. Turns out there's somebody on Modwiggler who wanted to know how to go about making an analog horse clop sound. And I thought this was a good time to show you how I would go about making a horse clopping sound using the DC circuit in a ring modulator. So let me plug in. I'm running 2 pulse waves at low frequency. One's set to about 2, one's to about 1. How you set each pulse width is what's creating the different rhythms within each oscillator. The X oscillator is about 6 and the Y oscillator is around 7. And that's kind of giving me the variation so it's not a consistent clopping sound. Let me plug this into the AC circuit so you can hear the difference. So you're not really getting that popping each cycle. That you do in DC. So from the ring modulator, I'm going into a multimode filter. This is a clone of the ARP 2500 filter designed by Dennis Collin. Fairly high resonance, and I'm tuned to about 675 hertz. And the only variation I'm doing is I'm running a sample and hold into the control voltage frequency through a VCA just to get a little bit of a variation between the sound of the clopping, so it's not as consistent a tone. And from the bandpass filter to add a little bit of ambience, just lightly through a spring reverb. This idea sort of lends itself to free-flowing and not being locked to a tempo, but if I wanted to lock to a tempo, I would take my other LFOs that are syncable, and I would have those re-triggering at very specific points to create very specific rhythms that would go to a track. Thanks for watching. This is my version of how I would use DC in a ring modulator to make a horse clopping sound if I had to do it with an analog synthesizer.